Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Alcumus ePermits webinar, where we're looking this time at managing permits to work remotely. We're all pleased to know, and we see it every day in the news, that COVID restrictions are finally easing. As I say here, the light at the end of the tunnel is coming, even though we still know COVID will be with us for a long time, and there's still some constraints in place. But what's the world going to look like when we come out of the tunnel? And is it even going to look anything like what it was when we went in? There's a fundamental question. I mean, actually, does it need to? Technology has proven itself over the last year that you can still carry on working, and we will still be able to carry on working in a socially distanced manner in what were previously crowded offices, even though everybody's being given the opportunity to flexibly work and be as productive as possible away from the office as much as being in the office. And some people would actually say they're potentially more productive working from home than they are actually being in the office. The continuing restrictions and flexible working, or even an inability to actually be on site, irrespective of any COVID restrictions, don't have to affect the management of a process or the ability for that process to be compliant. So in a remote process, we're looking here at the permit process. ePermits enables the creation of permit requests, approval of those requests, issue of permits and closure of permits, all to be done on different devices in different places and at different times if that meets your levels and requirements for compliance. So circumstances don't need to dictate the process. Compliance can be maintained at all times. And ePermits can ensure that permits can be issued on site, safety checklists completed, evidence of the process logged and attached to the permit documentation. And exactly the same for closing off, without necessarily having to be in the same place at the same time. So if we look at that process itself, if we consider a contractor, or it may be that you actually raise permit requests on behalf of your contractors. But in this example here, we're just getting the contractor to raise a permit request. They want to raise a request to do a piece of work on site. And in the ePermits process, there are multiple areas that the system will look at in terms of making sure that the request initially, before it even gets to approval, is compliant. The core element is something called permit workflow. This manages a workflow process. So the contractor is placing a permit request in their office. It's for a few days in advance, or maybe a week or even more in advance. So that request, once it's completed, can be sent to the appropriate approvers for either access or authorization to work, or for any high-risk activities that are going to be taking place. So welding up a ladder in a confined space is 3 permits: a hotworks permit, a confined space permit, and a work at height permit, all associated with an overriding authorization to work permit. Permits can be printed on paper, or we can go through a process of electronic signatures. They can be issued and closed. The system will store documentation, record the audit trail, who did what, where and when, and you're able to access information from reporting. Most importantly, what it's going to do is it's going to do what we call clash checking. It'll identify permits that are going to be taking place in the same location at the same time, or on the same piece of kit at the same time, and flag it up at the approval process. So that's the permit workflow element. It's the core of the ePermit system. Now around that we have 3 other modules in no particular sequence. RAMS workflow. So with this module, if there aren't associated RAMS with the job that have been approved by you first, can't submit that permit request. So if a RAMS has been identified as not existing for a job that I'm saying I want to come and do, contractor can submit RAMS through the ePermit system. Because of links to SIPOL, so if I'm going to be doing anything with any hazardous materials I can use the SciPol cost assessments as added parts of those RAMs as part of an integrated solution. The RAMs are submitted, they're directed through a workflow process to the appropriate people in the organization who can approve them. Once they've been approved, they're logged within the system and managed by putting timeframes around them. So RAMs are valid for 1 year from the point at which they've been approved. So once they're logged within the system, when I'm creating a permit request, I can attach the appropriate RAMs, and RAMs are activity, service, and location specific. I can't attach the wrong RAMs to a job. That meets that level of compliance activity. The next area, we've got what we call contractor compliance. ePermits needs to look at really just 2 key points from a permitting point of view. Are the insurances in place, and are they current at the time the job is going to take place? If I'm planning some work maybe a month in advance, I may well be insured now, but will that insurance still be valid at the time I'm planning to do the work? If it won't be, ePermits will flag that up to the contractor and flag it up to you at the approval stage, and I will have to provide you with evidence that the insurances have been renewed and are at the right level before you will even be able to issue that permit. So right up to the point where I turn up to do the work, if I haven't provided you with that evidence, you don't issue that permit. Now, again, as part of Alcumus, we have the integrations into Safe Contractor. Many of you may know of Safe Contractor. It's an accreditation service. So contractors are accredited, not just in terms of their insurances and whether they're an approved vendor, but it looks at a whole range of other areas to make sure that they're compliant, not just from a capability point of view, but also from an environmental point of view, all different types of policies, anti-slavery policies, and so forth. So a contractor can meet your requirements as a company for the type of organization that you want to work with, as well as being capable of doing the job with the proper level of insurance and you're our approved vendor. Now, we have an integration to Safe Contractor with ePermits. So if you are a Safe Contractor user, all of the information that ePermits requires is sucked from Safe Contractor and then monitored by the permit system using its time phasing as well. And then the final core module is this one called Worker Compliance. This looks at training, competency, inductions, and all sorts of background security checks in terms of security, eligibility to work in the UK, and if, for example, we're going on to children's wards in hospital, whether the appropriate DBS checks are in place, etc. The system will check for these. These are hard blocks. If I'm coming in to do this hot works in a confined space up a ladder, I may well be the world's greatest welder, but if I don't have work at height training, I can't submit that permit request. So if I've got these 4 core modules in place, work contractor compliance, RAMS workflow, worker compliance, and permit workflow, you have the confidence that whenever you receive a permit request, when you're in your office, from a contractor who has put this request together in their office, that it is compliant. In addition, there are a number of other functional modules that are available in the system. Electronic signatures is a key. This is what makes the whole process paperless and now enables this ability to do remote issue and remote closure of permits if it is applicable to the situation. But also, apart from the remote issue and remote closure of permits, it enables various things to happen. You can take paper completely out of the system if you want to. Most of our clients using the system will still print, for example, a hard copy of a high-risk permit, an HV permit or a hot works permit, and still pin it up at the place of work so that people are aware that there is a high-risk activity taking on in that location. But the actual permit document is electronically signed on a tablet, smartphone, iPad, iPhone, whatever device that you and the contractors have available. It also has compliant, COVID compliant capability. So I can sign on my tablet 2 meters away from the contractor, and once I've signed to issue that permit as the authorised person, I can then ensure that the contractor can actually sign acceptance of that permit on their own device. And therefore, we record everything, it's all time stamped on the permit document, but there is no need for us to be within 2 meters of each other, and no need for any devices or pens to be shared. There's also the ability to do video inductions and tests. Inductions, if they're logged in here, are not hard blocks. If it tags that I need to be inducted to do a particular job, in most situations what that means is I will need to turn up at the site on the day of the work. I'll be put into the permit office or the security office, and I need to go through the video induction, and I need to answer the questions, and if I've passed, I'm then allowed to go and do the work. Now, that has two issues. Firstly, the most important one is when the contractor turns up to do the induction, it's actually delaying start of that job. But more importantly, the contractor's clock starts running the moment they arrive on site. So actually they're charging you for the privilege of doing your induction. Having this module within the e-permit systems means that contractors can do any inductions necessary in their own time prior to arriving at the place of work, so that when they arrive on site, they are inducted, they go straight to the place of work. And there's also links to other Alcumus solutions. So when you're doing a job, there are various other tasks that need to be done. You might want to run audits and inspections on your contractors while they're doing work. So those audits and inspections to be done using a standard format, a standard form. Fill those in. Dynamic risk assessments. Again, I'm going to be working on the roof. I've got all the training necessary. There's 50 miles an hour winds and it's raining. I need to do a dynamic risk assessment just to make sure it's safe for that work to still take place. And most importantly, that dynamic risk assessment needs to be tagged and time-stamped that it was completed before the work started. So you can see a clear audit trail that the dynamic risk assessment was done prior to the work itself starting. And accidents and incidents will still happen, a method of accident and incident reporting, because all of these things are tied to a job, and a job is defined in a permit. So in terms of the workflows, for permit workflows, when a permit is requested by a contractor, the system first checks whether RAMs are compliant. If they are, the contractor can move on, and it will then check the contractor company's compliance. Are the details correct, and is the contractor properly insured? And if you have the worker compliance module as well, it'll check for all the training and competencies before. If there's a failure, the process will end, and the contractor cannot submit that permit request. But if it goes through all of the gates, when that permit request is submitted to the end client, you know as you read it that it is properly compliant in sense of RAMs existing, training and competency being correct, insurance is in place, inductions in place, etc. So when that contractor has requested that permit and has submitted that permit, the requests are then routed automatically to individuals who are authorised to approve those permits. So in this instance, we're combining an access permit or an authorisation to work permit with a confined space permit and hotworks permits. In this simple example, the access permit will go to the site manager. He's the one that will approve that someone can come on site. Yeah, we haven't got Boris Johnson coming to do one of his PR tours, so yes, we can do this welding in that particular area. Health and safety may be the ones that are looking at a confined space permit, making sure that everything such as the gas tests and so forth will be done and all the appropriate documentation is in place. Hotworks might need signing off by 2 or 3 people. It might need signing off by the site manager. It might need signing off as well by someone in health and safety, but it might need signing off by people who are technical authorities for doing the hotworks. And when that permit request has arrived, it may also be considered that, well, actually, in order for that hotworks to take place, we will need to isolate the fire systems, the fire alarm devices. So you can instigate then another permit document in there for doing the isolations. Only once all of those permits have been approved by everybody in the group, then the contractor is then sent a message that says you may turn up at the appointed time and at the appropriate place for this activity to happen. Contractor is then alerted. Permit documents can be printed and sent to the contractor in advance, or they can be printed and left at the permit office for collection when the contractor arrives, or an electronic version is available so the contractor can see they've got approved permits and they can turn up at the appropriate time. So now we're in the process of where we want to. This is where the opportunity for either remote or COVID compliant issuing of permits will work. The approval workflow has been done, and it's all done through the module as we've talked about. High risk permits, if they're required, they'll go to the appropriate teams. Isolations, if they're required, are done. And again, if anything is rejected, the process will end. If everything is approved, we can now move forward. Apologies for that. So now the contractor will arrive on site, and we're now going to go through how do we actually manage this process if there are examples where we can't actually be on site with the contractor. There may be some low risk activities that still need to be checked off prior to the work starting, but we physically can't be in that place at the time. So the contractor arrives on site, and the first thing that the system can enable is a PPE check. So I'm actually at the security desk. I'm there with the security guard, and he is going through, first of all, if the right people have turned up on the job. So the permit staff checks with the people that have actually turned up. If, for example, there was a change in personnel prior to the job, prior to the contractor arriving, it is still possible to run those competency checks on the new person on the permit. It'll check they're properly trained and qualified. And if they're not properly trained and qualified, the permit can't be issued. If they are properly trained and qualified, the system will update the permit. So rather than a paper permit and you're scribbling out the name of the person at the top with a pen and writing the new name on top, for which there's obviously no audit trail or checks in place, then we can do that. But one of the first things that will also be done is a PPE check. So here we have a module within the permit system that allows you to specify the PPE not just required for the jobs, the high risk activities, but you also may have internal or site specific safety requirements. So for anybody coming on site, they have to have helmet, safety boots, high vis jacket and safety spectacles. For COVID compliance, you might want to add face mask and gloves in there. The key is that these things, once they're specified in our PPE module, will actually appear on the permit document, and that is what the contractor has signed up to. So they've signed up to the fact they need to be wearing face mask and gloves to be COVID compliant. If you conduct one of those audits on site and they're not wearing the face mask, they're in breach of the permit. So in the old process, if you like, the key to issuing a permit is that the AP or the authorised person, the person who's going to actually issue that permit, needs to be at the place of work when the permit is issued and closed, in particular for high risk activities. So why is that? Well, paper permits mean there is actually no other way to safely issue permits in a compliant manner. You have to physically sign the permit, date and time it as the AP, and the contractor needs to physically sign that permit and date it and timestamp it. They also need to be in location to go through any safety checklists. So safety checklists, for example, if you're doing hot works, you'll have a list on your existing permit documents that says, we need to check that these things are in place. And with the paper permit system, you and the contractor will be standing there going through each of those safety checklists together ticking the box so that you both agree that it is actually safe to start work. Once it's been agreed it's safe to start work by both parties, both then actually physically sign that paper permit. The copies are then split, and then hopefully they're reunited again at the end of the process. What's the future? Well, it's not actually the future, it's now. Electronic signatures in the permit system can be used on any smartphone, iPad, tablet device with an internet browser. So the authorised person can sign the permit, and the contractor can sign for acceptance of the permit at the point or time of issue. So you can still be physically in the same place, and you can sign for the permits in just the same way you would have done with paper. Remote issue can be done if there is no AP available. Now, it is possible, for example, to say, right, I'm sitting here at my desk, the contractor is on site. If this is an acceptable process for you, you can get the contractor to open up their video record on their smartphone or their tablet, and you walk around the site together by video rather than being physically there, and you go through that safety checklist together. Once that safety checklist has been done, the contractor can then save that video and they can email it to me, and I can then upload that to the permit record. Well, I've actually got a better solution than actually standing there face to face, because I've got video evidence of that safety checklist being conducted, that should any issue arise and the system, it needs to be audited or someone comes in to inspect that record, you can actually see what was done and how it was done as part of the permit. The signatures can also be done on different devices. So I will sign it on my tablet, but the contractor, or I will sign it at my desk on my computer, and the contractor can sign it at their place of work on their smartphone or tablet. So you can issue permits and you can close permits at the point of work, from a desk, or wherever is appropriate for you to do it. Some high-risk activities, you will need to be at site to go through those high-risk activities. And the contractor can sign acceptance and issue in the same way. So in the e-permit system, the authorised issuer can sign the permit electronically here, and once they save that, the contractor is then able to sign. Now, I mentioned that you can sign on different devices. If I am sitting at my desk and this guy, Steve, is going to be at the place of work, I can select this. It will actually forward a link to Steve, and when he opens that link up on his smartphone, he has this page. He can then sign on his smartphone and save, and that record is now updated within e-permits, even though people are not physically in the same place at the same time. So the permit can now be issued to that contractor, and they can go on site and go to the place of work for the next steps. Okay, we need to do a dynamic risk assessment as part of the process. So dynamic risk assessments can be filled in on an electronic device. It's a standard template. You can create the templates for whatever dynamic risk assessments you want and make them available to your contractor. Once they've completed those, they can then be again uploaded to the permit bundle for the job. So completing it will timestamp it. When it's uploaded to the permit bundle, you have evidence that not only were the safety checklists done at a particular time, but the contractor also conducted the required dynamic risk assessment, and it's timestamped and date stamped as well before they actually start doing the work. At the end of the job, you can scan and upload any other documents as well. So the dynamic risk assessments have now been completed in the process as well. Finally, when we're at the place of work, we need to go through the safety checklist, and we've talked about that already, where this guy may actually not be at the place of work. Once the safety checklists have been gone through in an electronic format, this is what the permit would look like, with the safety checklists ticked off and completed. They can be yes, no, not applicable, mandatory, not mandatory, however you want to set up your specific safety precautions on your permit documents. And here you can see how the signatures, this example here, has gone through the whole process of closure as well. But here you can see it was approved by Howard at his desk at 10:03. It was then issued by Howard at 10:12, and it was accepted by Steve at 10:13. When the permit was closed off, it was closed off by Steve at 10:19 and closed off by Howard at 10:19 as well. Now, obviously, these times are close together because this was a demonstration that was running just continuously. In reality, you would see maybe different dates and different times here. These two dates and times would be synchronous because you're going to issue the permit at the same time, and so would these two dates and times be synchronous. These names may be different. It may well have been issued by Howard, but Howard changed shift, so when it was closed off, depending on who'd logged into the system, their name would appear here with their signature, but it doesn't have to be the same people. So those safety checklists have now been ticked off, and the contractor can actually now start work. So the issue process again, and by the way, you will receive access to a link that will enable you to review this again. So you can just take these workflow processes in a much more sensible manner rather than me rushing through it with regard to the presentation. So it will check the contractor, it'll check that people on the permits are right. If they're not, it'll check them. If they need to do an induction, they can do the inductions through the induction module. If all the people are correct, it'll check PPE if you've got that module. If you haven't got the right PPE, you send the contractor away. If the contractor isn't on today's list, you send them away. If you've got the electronic signatures model, you can go through the electronic process that we've just discussed and you can issue the permits. If not, you go through the paper process and issue the permits too and move to the next step. So now we're able to issue those permits. We're now at the close stage of the process as well. When we go through the close process, it's exactly the same as the issue process. The contractor would sign off the closed permit first, and then the AP would sign off the closure post that. They don't have to be done at the same time. You may have, for example, some low risk activities taking place. Let's say someone's coming to install a vending machine on a Saturday. You're not going to have an AP on site necessarily to be there when that closes off. So the contractor can sign for closure of that permit. And once that is saved on his screen, when you come into the office on Monday, you will have a to-do list presented to you on the permit screen. And one of the areas will be permits overdue for closure. You can access those permits overdue for closure. You can then review the place of work and you can fill in an audit. So let's say, for example, I've gone to the place of work where this vending machine was installed. Yes, it's working fine, but the contractor had left polystyrene packaging in the corridor. That's in breach of the RAMs, so you can actually photograph that, upload it to the permit system as a record against the contractor, and you can make notes against that contractor and indeed actually tag things on a mini audit at the close stage, which records against the contractor. You could then bring in a contractor for their annual review, and you can actually produce a report that says, okay, you guys were on site 20 times last year, 19 times we had a problem, and guess what? This guy, Steve Chandler, was in charge each time. You can actually go into the system and mark Steve Chandler as non-current on that contractor's team list so that he is not actually allowed on your site again. So it gives you detailed contractor information as well. So once it's all signed off, it's all audit trail. We know who signed what, where, and when. Everything is now pulled together. Nothing's missing. All the actions are stamped. There's an audit trail. It's all stored. You've got the permit documents. You've got PPE lists. You've got dynamic risk assessments. You've got audits and inspections, accident incident reporting, all bundled together in one. So if someone needs to come and do an audit on a particular job, they're able to access that document and view everything that was associated with that job, all time stamped so they can see the process. No more disappearing off to different drawers to try and pull out that information. And oh, by the way, why haven't we got that third copy of the permit that was signed by the contractor? Contractor went home with it, everybody forgot it, a piece of paper's gone missing. So in the closure process, we go through the same thing, whether work's completed safely and correctly. If not, you can do that audit I mentioned to you and upload any information. You have the electronic signatures capability. You electronically sign the closure, both the contractor and the AP. And again, that AP can be sitting at an office rather than at the place of work if necessary. And you could go through the same video recording process. So, Mr. Contractor, please video the place of work. Let me go around each part. Let me make sure everything has been put back where it should be and that the device and that the equipment is now working. Thank you very much. Please email me that video and then I'll close the permit down. So that's basically taking you through how in today's environment, you can actually still manage permits to work and even do it remotely without having to be at site. Now, as I say, it does come with a health warning. There are certain activities you will always want to ensure you are at the place of work to do. But the technology is there that enables us to do things remotely if we need to. And it's not that much different to the technology that has enabled us over the last year to work successfully and productively from home as well. If anybody wants to see this sort of thing in action, I can arrange an e-permit demonstration for you. My contact details are at the bottom of the screen. Please do contact me and we can set up a demonstration for you to show you exactly that process and any other areas that you may want to look at. You may have, for example, some key interest in applying some of the other Alchemist products like Safe Contract. How does that work within a permit system? How can the accidents incident reporting be tied in to the e-permit system? So I'll happily take you to any part of the system that you want to see and we can take the discussion from there. So are there any questions from anybody?
I don't see any at the moment, Richard. Anyone who has a question can enter it into the questions part of the control panel in front of them. Maybe we can just wait a couple of seconds for that, Richard.
I do apologise. I did forget to tell everybody at the start that there is this question section. So I do apologise. I'll happily hang around for a couple of minutes in case anybody has a question they'd like to submit. But again, if not, if you've got questions, you can always email to me at the address that's shown on the screen. I think one of the key questions that I do often get in this area is about that sort of element of remote working, and it's about whether or not any device or any web browser, is it dependent? The answer is no. There's no apps to download. There's no apps anywhere that are required in the system. It is purely a web-based activity.
So there are a couple of questions there.
Okay.
That have come in, Richard. Stephen just wondering whether we will share the information as he was a little late. Yes, we'll send out the webinar recording to everyone who registered either this afternoon or at some point before Tuesday morning. And a question also, does the software interface with other CAFM systems that contractors use?
Yeah, the system can integrate with other systems. There is an API. The question is always, what information do you want shared between the systems? Very often there are only really two touch points between, for example, CAFM systems and the permit system. The first one may be the introduction or the automatic population in the permit system of the job number, for example. Once that job number is populated, then the permit system does its thing. And at the end of the process, you'll then want to upload the documentation back into the CAFM system so that everything is then logged alongside the job definition in the CAFM system. Yes, that is possible. As I say, we have an API. Each CAFM system is different, so we need to look at it on a case-by-case basis as to what needs to be done and what information you want fed across to the CAFM system.
So another question, Richard, what is the HSE requirement regarding showing the permit at the point of work? And do you recommend printing or what alternative?
To be honest, I'll be truthful. I don't know any regulation on the from the HSE about showing that. A lot of it is often embedded within your own rules and regulations of how you will be compliant with the overall HSE needs. A lot of our clients will insist that they will have for example, I'm doing hot works in an area, they will insist on having a printed copy of that permit at the place of work. Now, they can still go around the whole process and do the electronic signatures, including that hot works permit, and it's all then stored and archived in the system. And at the end of the process, you can tear up the paper permit that was pinned up because it was purely there as a warning. Now, we have also got clients that say, no, our rules and regulations state we must have the printed, signed copy of the high-risk permit, in which case you can print that high-risk permit. You can physically sign it at the place of work, but what you have to do at the end of the process is scan and upload that document into the e-permit system, so you have got that document that was physically signed archived within the system. So it can fit whatever requirement you have. You can either do it all electronically, you can have a printed copy just for information purposes, or you can still wet sign a high-risk permit and scan and upload it into the permit system at the end of the process. But either of those, if they meet your requirements, the system can handle that.
Okay, next question, Richard, is regarding the recording of the location where the permit has been signed by the different parties. Is that logged through a built-in GPS system?
Not at the moment, but we have had this request. A while back, we were talking to a company that manages telephone masts, and their requirement was obviously, look, we can't put an AP at every telephone mast in the UK that's being serviced. So we want to be able to issue remotely, and this is what actually started this whole concept of the electronic signatures a couple of years ago. So they wanted to do that, but they also wanted to make sure it was time-stamped and GPS stamped. The reason being that at the end of the process, once the contractor's finished the job and they are closing that job out from their perspective, they wanted to GPS stamp it so that they could see if the sign-off was done at the site of the tower, or was it done at the Dog and Duck 10 miles down the road. If it was done at the Dog and Duck, guess what? We're not paying that whole bill. So the capability is there. It's very easy to build into the GPS tagging on a smartphone that says when I press the button to close it, it can add a GPS tag. The technology is there. It's not something that's been implemented at the moment, because most of these activities are actually taking place at site. But it is possible to do, and it can be done. We will do that as and when requirement gets built in. The technology is there already.
Okay, next question is regarding the training competency checking. Is the software connected to an Alcumus Fed platform, or can we link it to other competency software such as Competency Cloud or Power BI?
Okay, both. We have the ability within the IEX platform that I mentioned to you earlier on within Alcumus, that you can build up the registry, if you like, of the individuals and their competency records and so forth. And then that information is then pumped into the e-permit system, so it can actually do its task of comparing the date and time of a permit with the current validity of the contractor's training records. Now, the way it's done, if you've just got e-permit standalone, is that information from contractors has to be uploaded into the e-permit system. If you're looking at using it from an IEX platform, if you have an IEX platform, you can feed all that information in, and e-permits will just suck it in directly. But if you use another platform, again, we could use that API capability to say, okay, what information do you want, or do you want sucked off of? Was it, for example, Power BI or Competency Cloud? What information can we suck? Do you need to suck out of there and put into the permit system, so it will then run its checks. So you're going to only want to maintain information in one place, whether it's IEX, Competency Cloud, Power BI, or whatever, and ePermits will then suck the information out whenever necessary. And that can be a batch process, so every night ePermits gets updated. Depends how quickly things change. If you need a live update, as soon as something changes in Power BI or Competency Cloud, it's updated within ePermits. That's a slightly different constraint on the API. It makes it more complex, but obviously still technically feasible.
Okay, thank you, Richard. We don't seem to have any more questions at the moment, unless someone wants to squeeze one in the next few seconds. Other than that, thank you so much for the questions. They really were good questions. Thank you for your attendance. And Richard, I'll let you sign off.
All right, lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. And by all means, contact me. My details are on the screen. Thanks
Actually,
very much.
hold on.
Oh,
Stephen,
hold on.
sorry, Richard. Stephen has
That's
asked
all
a
right.
question. He got in there. Well done, Stephen. Okay, will ePermit interface with other cloud-based work tracking platforms, and do you publish a list of other platforms that you can interface with?
To date, Stephen, the interface has never been required by a company. And again, this comes down to the data that needs to be transferred across. We are often asked if we will interface with some CRM systems. Sorry, not CRM, sorry, CAFM systems. When we go through the process and ultimately the cost of an integration, in exchange for putting in the permit number or putting in the job number into the permit and then exporting the documentation out later, the costs were just not sensible. Plus, if you have a CAFM system, that's often a system that's maybe internal to your organization. ePermits is a cloud-based solution. It's accessed by the contractors and everything else. Most IT companies don't, or IT groups do not want any possibility that third parties can tunnel in through another system into the internal system. So we've come across situations where IT have put blocks on these types of integrations, and others where the cost of the integration has put a block just based on the limited amount of data and information that needs to be transferred across. So it's another one of those things. Technology-wise, it is possible. Practical-wise, that's a decision for you, the client, to make as to whether the gain you make by having the integration is worth the cost of actually doing that integration.
Great, I think that's it.
Okay.
Richard, thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope to hear from some of you soon.